Welcome to Reputation Room. I'm Andy Hallmark. Today, we're talking about policy communications, how companies, coalitions, and leaders communicate around complicated public policy issues when the political climate is constantly changing. My guest is Jeff Navin. Jeff is a partner and co-founder of Boundary Stone Partners, where he advises businesses, investors, and organizations navigating the intersection of markets, technology, and public policy. He's also worked in external affairs for TerraPower, served in senior roles at the U.S. Department of Energy and the Department of Labor, and spent years and years and years on Capitol Hill. So I had a front row seat to public affairs from a lot of different angles, government, politics, and business. So, Jeff, welcome to the Reputation Room.
Thanks, Andy. I think your TLDR is that I'm old.
I don't think that's it. I'm just saying your experience. That's all I'm saying, right?
That's great.
I want to start here, if I could, Jeff. When people outside the Beltway hear the term policy communications or public affairs, I'm not really sure they know what that means. So if we could just level set this conversation, if you were trying to describe that to somebody who doesn't know as a public affairs leader, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think when you're talking about public affairs, what you're really talking about is how do you move the needle on public policy issues that you care about, that affect your company, that affect your business. A lot of that is the direct advocacy, showing up, knocking on someone's door, asking for a meeting and saying, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this thing and how it might impact my company in your district or this industry that you care about or whatever. And, the intersection with, I think, public affairs and some of the communication stuff is that includes direct conversations, but it also includes the indirect conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Washington and state capitals and state legislators, they don't operate in a vacuum. They read the newspaper, they watch television, they use social media, and they want to make sure that the topics and issues that they're working on are both communicated to their constituents, but also, to them. So public affairs, I think, is very broad, and it can include everything from, grassroots campaigns to win hearts and minds in a particular district, to direct lobbying and advocacy, to the types of advertisements that the people who live in Washington D.C. are familiar with, where it's talking about a very narrow issue and maybe not something that's relevant to the vast majority of people in that area,
right?
But to the people who are making the decisions, it matters. And for people who live outside of the Beltway or haven't spent a lot of time here. You get off the metro at the Pentagon stop and all of the advertisements are on like, this weapon system is better than that weapon system, right? Why? Because the people getting off that train are going to be the ones making a decision about, whether you're choosing this airplane versus that airplane or this ship.
I mean, they even paper the walls inside as you drive by on the train with those kind of things.
That's right. Yeah. So all of that, I think, fits into public affairs, and all of that sort of, it's like bringing those threads together. The substantive of the argument you're making, who you're talking to, how they receive information, and how you get that information to them.
I think one of the challenges, and kind of where I want to start after, thank you for that explanation, is the political climate always changes. Administrations change, Congress changes, may change again soon. State governments change, regulators change. But a company or an industry, so if you're representing someone, they could be working on the same issue for years or decades. So how do you build a public communications strategy that can survive changes in political leadership? I think that's probably a topic that is apropos at this moment, especially.
Yeah, and this moment is unique, but it's also not different, right? There are many unique moments that sort of, that will come up over time, and that will continue to change. But I think at its core, it really comes down to audience, right? My guiding principle and everything that I've done in public affairs really comes down to, if I want somebody to do something, it has to occur as an opportunity for them, not for me, not for my company, not for my client, but the opportunity for that person. So it's connecting the ask that you're making to what drove that person to run for Congress. What are the relevant issues in their district? What are they trying to accomplish? And how can I make sure that they see the thing that I'm asking them to do as compatible with what they're trying to get done, why they came there. So, you and I both spent a lot of time, for example, in nuclear power, right?
Right.
Nuclear is one of those issues that has maintained consistent, broad bipartisan support. And that's, I think, because people see different things in it, right? Sheldon Whitehouse, very progressive senator, cares a lot about climate change, champion of nuclear. Why? Because it's carbon-free baseload
Right.
power that can help the company solve or help the country solve those issues that he cares about. John Barrasso in Wyoming, not motivated by climate change, but very much motivated by the opportunity of expanding nuclear power and what that means for the grid, but also for his state, right? Wyoming has a lot of uranium resources, and TerraPower is building their reactor in that state, and it's already creating hundreds and hundreds of jobs, in that region. So both of them can arrive at the same place, but with different paths. And I
Right.
think the challenge that we're in the unique situation, in this unique place that we are now, where everything's so polarized, is how do you make both arguments without alienating the other side,
Well,
right?
that brings me to something because I've seen, especially in the last cycle, the what I'll only describe as message shifting has been way over the top. I feel
Yeah,
like a lot of people are like, we've got to say this 10 sets of words here all the time. But isn't there inherently a danger in being too attached to message shifting too?
100%. And, you and I are old enough to remember a time when if you got something printed in the newspaper, you know, the only record of that would be if somebody went down to the library and got in the microfiche
Catch a
machine
clip, right? Yeah,
and back and
exactly.
looked
Yeah.
and said, "Well, what was this company saying 5, 10, 20 years ago?" And
Right.
maybe some enterprising reporters would, track that stuff and say, "This is
Yep.
inconsistent with what you said." But you're talking about a few people that would have to go through a lot of work to be able to catch you in that shift. That is not the world we live in today. Everything you say, everything lives forever on the internet, and anybody with Google can, do a quick search and find out those inconsistencies. So really at the core, I think, is you have to take a long view of these things, right? So, you know, maybe you're saying less about climate change at the moment because that might be a little bit less of a salient way to sell things with the current government, but you are still going to talk about clean. You are still going to talk
Right.
about the attributes, right? And I think, the most important thing, and this won't surprise, I think, any of your listeners, that you start with an authentic you have to start with authenticity, and you have to be very clear about your mission and why you're doing what you're doing. And you can, shift the framing around the edges here or there, or add new perspectives and things as they come up. But you can't fundamentally change your value proposition, who you are, and what you're trying to accomplish. That's when people will look at it, and you'll lose that authenticity, and you'll kind of be branded as somebody who's phony or shifting in the winds.
I actually want to lean into that for a second because I think a lot of people, I mean, when I first came to DC and people who didn't live in DC, they would say, "Oh, do you guys just spin stuff all over the place?" I'm like, I don't know who sold you that bill of goods that we can just spin everything all over the place, but I believe authenticity matters more than anything else. Like, and I think that people look at K Street and they look at PR firms and just whatever that whole infrastructure, and they say, "Oh, there's no authenticity there." But I would completely disagree with that if you want to be successful at it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, people come here. Look, it's very easy to, just think of politicians as these self-serving, self-dealing, people who are out here to make a quick buck and
Right.
screw the country. Reality is if you're looking to make money, there are a million different ways that you can spend the same time, energy, and resources to do
Yes.
that rather than trying to serve in Congress and have that
Right.
lead you to some kind of,
I'd have to run for office every 2 years,
that's right.
and
The
it's
vast
horrible.
majority of people
Yes.
here are doing it because they believe in they believe in the issues that they're working on. They want it. They're here because they want to make a difference, and the like. And I think that is exactly true. The same thing, just about everybody that's in government could leave and go to the private sector and make more money, but they do their work because they care about the country and they want to make a contribution, right? So if you start kind of from that premise, they're not going to have a high tolerance for people who are just out to make a quick buck or to you know put lipstick on a pig or whatever. And like then that's why I think it's so important to get very clear about why you're doing what you're doing and make sure that that comes through in all of your communications. Again, you're not going to walk into the Trump White House and say, "I'm here to solve climate change," right?
No.
And you're also not going to walk into a Democratic office and talk about, "I just want energy dominance," right? Because those are just coded things for the other side. But the companies that are going to do the best in that debate and in that conversations are the ones that have been showing up consistently for years in both Democratic and Republican offices.
Yeah.
That's going to be 3 presidential administrations from the concept and of what you're trying to do, and then fully turning that thing on and delivering electrons to the grid. So you have to play the long game and you have to be consistent.
I also want to get in the relationship between, I'm going to use broad terms, public affairs, advertising, public relations. From the outside, I think people sometimes think that those are all just separate lanes. But I mean, you and I have had a chance to work together on a real policy campaign. They have to be so interwoven together. Can you describe, how you kind of have the differences in these things, but how they have to be part of a team if you want to succeed on the policy campaign?
Yeah. So if you think about a policy campaign, it's kind of like any other marketing campaign or a political campaign, right? You're trying to convince an audience of people to take an action that you want them to take, or you need them to take for your business, or for whatever it is that you're up to. And for that to work, they want to hear directly from you. And then you want others saying something similar. If one
Right.
person is saying a message to somebody, it might be credible, it might not be. But if you hear it from me, and then you hear it from, your neighbor down the street, you hear it from a colleague, you get in your car to drive home and you hear it on NPR as you're driving, home from work, and you know, see a digital advertisement pop up on your computer when you log in to check the news, you start to get that feedback and you're starting to see those consistent messages, right? People do want to hear directly from the companies, but they also want to hear from third-party validators. They want to hear from outside experts. And so all of these things kind of work together. If and the reality is we don't always think of ourselves in this way, but we are consumers of information in the exact same way. If
100%.
you want to go buy a car, you're going to go to the dealership and you're going to talk to the dealer, right? You're also going to do some independent research and you're going to look at
Right.
the reviews, and you might go to, you know, whatever, Car and Driver or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal and say, what do these people say about these cars? And you're also subconsciously going to be, you know, watching a basketball game or driving down the road, and you're going to see a billboard, you're going to hear an advertisement, and
Right.
all of those things are going to come together to influence how you decide which car to buy, right?
Well,
And it's a
well,
very similar kind of ecosystem, if you will,
right.
on the policy front. You want to hear from the companies, you're also going to want to hear from others. And the thing that's a little bit unique, maybe it's not all that unique, is there are people on the other side saying what they're telling you is a bunch of garbage. Like, you shouldn't listen to them. You should listen to our argument, right? So it is a competitive marketplace. It's not all that different, however, from what you see in other industries. It's just that our audience happens to be policymakers, government officials, rather than, car consumers, or, uh, you know, people looking to buy real estate, or people looking to try to figure out which brand of orange juice to buy. It's a similar kind of discussion. It's just a different audience.
So what do we do? I mean, where do companies go wrong on this? I mean, I feel like we're heading into a time of what I can only describe as economic austerity in many sectors, right? And so if you go to them and you're like, listen, I can go talk to the senator and that will be effective. But if I really wanted to do this right, you really want to do this right, we need to have a more integrated, holistic campaign. How do you sell that during these times? And should you always sell the big campaign?
Well, sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't, right? I will say that, meaning, sometimes you're trying to really have a major shift in policy, or how the
Right,
direction of something's happening. And sometimes you're just trying to work a little bit on the edges to clean something up here or there.
right,
Maybe you just need 3 words included in a bill that kind of change, something. I'll give you, we had a client that was a thermal energy storage company, and when the tax credit language came out and said who was eligible, the way that it was written, their technology might not have been included. So we just went directly to Treasury and said, I don't think this is what you're intending, is to exclude this technology. And they said, okay, you're right. And they made the change. We didn't need to put up billboards and have the Goodyear blimp towing a banner flying around, the Beltway. We were able to
right.
kind of do that, because it was a smaller fix. Some of the other things we work on, bigger deals, change in policy, you'd need more of an aggregated big campaign with a lot of these tentacles, right? So, but I think the biggest thing to your question is, what do companies get wrong in this? The first thing is they don't think that they need it, right? And we've seen this play out in industries over and over again, and we're seeing it play out now. So when Microsoft didn't really have much of a government affairs presence in Washington until the FTC tried to break up that company.
Right.
And guess what? When it's an existential threat and you realize that not playing in this space is a threat to you, all you put resources into it. Google, same thing. Very small public policy operation in DC. And then the regulators came after them and they realized that they didn't have enough friends. And now they invest very heavily in policy and in public affairs. Uh, and I think you're seeing that right now with AI as well, right? Like AI, they are struggling from the fact that they have a very bad image problem that they in many ways created themselves. And their pitch seems to be something along the lines of there's an existential threat that you're not really feeling, but trust us, it's there. We can't lose this race to China. But if we are successful, what we're essentially going to do is turn tech bro billionaires into trillionaires, put you out of work and make it almost impossible for your children to have a job. And by the way, it's going to drive up the cost of your electricity. It's going to impact your water quality
Right.
and the like. Let's go. Right. So I think that they're starting to now realize that they don't have that social license. And so now they're going to have to start investing in policy comms, and people who live in DC are seeing it. We're seeing OpenAI and Anthropic dropping in digital ads and talking about how great their products are. And they're trying to sort of turn that narrative. But the biggest mistake is that people understandably say, I don't like Washington. I don't want to deal with politicians. I'd rather spend my money somewhere else. It's a pain in my butt. I don't really want to, dedicate the time, energy, and resources to it. And it usually takes some kind of a threat in order for that to, for people to kind of say, all right, I guess I have to do it. And hopefully for those companies, it doesn't get to the point that it got with Google or Microsoft
Right.
or what AI is running into, and they can catch it before it becomes that existential threat. But I think the biggest mistake people make is ignoring these things until there's a real
Till it's too
problem.
late. Yeah.
And there's a big difference between showing up early and developing the relationship so when you need help that they know you and they trust you, and showing up when your back's against the wall and it's a dire situation and you're begging and pleading with officials to kind of help you out. So
Right.
I think that's the biggest mistake. And then I think the second one is, swinging with the pendulum, right? Like we're not at a state right now where, 2 years ago, Republicans did very, very well. And the MAGA Trump ideology was ruling Washington. And now we're seeing the pendulum swing back a little bit. And if you're seen as running to the flavor of the month this way and then running to the flavor of the month that way, you're not seen as authentic and credible.
When we talk about Congress and regulators too, we always think of whoever's been elected or appointed to these positions. But you and I both know and have been this person. There is an army of 20-year-olds running around Capitol Hill. And I remember when I first got to Capitol Hill, I told my parents, I said, there's some 20-year-olds doing big time stuff in the country. I think you should know this, you
Right,
know?
right,
And
right.
I was one of them. And I was like, this is the wildest thing to me. I mean, when you think about communications and you think about, yeah, okay, you have to get to the senator or the congressperson, but before you ever get there, you got to get through a staff person who's overworked, underpaid, and just driven to the ground and is probably learning stuff on the fly. I mean, what do you need to do on a public policy side, from the communication side, to make sure that these people not only understand it, but can get to the senator and translate it right as well?
Yeah. And that, I think the most important thing is lead with the opportunity for them, right?
Yes.
Is it jobs in your district? Is it lowering the cost of electricity? Is it empowering the major employers in your district? Is it the topic or the issue that particular member of Congress cares a lot about, right? And you're going to have slightly different ways to frame that with different offices. And I'm not saying that you're inconsistent in the core thing that you're trying to accomplish in the core message, but it has to be framed as to why your boss should care about this. Because ultimately, that's the first question that staffer is going to get. You and I have both
Right.
been staffers, and you walk in, and it's like if you walked in and said, "I met with this really cool company," and they're like, "Great, what's
Why
that
do
mean
I
for you?"
care?
There's a lot of great companies out there. There's a lot of people doing cool stuff.
Right.
right? So it might be that that member is really concerned about jobs in the district. And if you can show up and say, there are 327 people who work for us that are living in your district every day, that's a very compelling hook. But you might not have that, right? And so maybe this is a member who cares deeply about solving climate change. Okay, we're going to talk about how our company and our technology are able to do that.
Right.
Maybe they care about cheap energy for the developing world because they are on the Foreign Affairs Committee and they care about maintaining strong relationships with Africa or with South America. Well, that's a way that you
Right.
can frame this as well. If you can do that in the first 2 or 3 sentences, it just sets the listening for that staffer because, again, what's the opportunity for them? I have to show to my boss that I'm doing things that are aligned with what they care about. And if you can make that case to them early, that just makes the job a lot easier. We've all been there. We've all sat through those meetings, both as staff or as, consultants or, where it's just here's the PowerPoint about what my company does, and it ends
Yes.
up doing nothing. They'll be
Nothing.
polite in the meeting, but they're gonna walk out of that saying, "Okay, well, now I know this company exists," but that's not why you're there. And I think the other point, just to kind of pull on the thread moving from the legislative branch where everything you said is 100% true, to the executive branch, same thing, right? We think about
Yeah.
all these secretaries and these political appointees and these Trump administration officials. When I was the chief staff at DOE, we had about 120,000 people who worked in the DOE enterprise. About 200 of them were political appointees, right?
Right. It's
So
crazy when you think about
fraction
it.
of a percent, right?
Right.
The rest of those folks are career employees or contractors that are going to be there. They were there before this president took power. They'll be there after the current president leaves, and they're going to continue, to do that work, for years to come. So sometimes you just have to kind of recognize that you're exactly right. That what is the space we're operating in, and how do we make those arguments in ways that land with folks.
You remind me, I at one point worked for a Maryland state agency, and I came in as a communication director for a political appointee. And I remember meeting with people for the first time, and I had all these ideas, and they literally looked at me like, "I've been here for 30 years. You will be gone in 2." And so I had to totally switch the way I think, quite frankly, when I was sharing information there.
Yeah, and I will tell you, like, I started my first job in the executive branch was at the Labor Department in the Obama administration, and I kind of walked in there thinking, well, I'll be the political appointee who comes in and helps clean up the messes that the career folks have created, and then almost every instance, 99%, it was the opposite. It was those career folks who are like, okay, one of your fellow appointees stepped in it. We've seen this before. Here's how we can help you clean it up.
Yes.
A-
Yes.
And you realize the real value that those folks have is that they've been doing this stuff long before you showed up on the scene, and they can be really
100%.
helpful. Yeah.
I will say too, though, I just if by some miracle you get the meeting that you want with the person that you want, you've gotten through staff. Let's talk about messenger versus message for a second, because I think it equally important in policy communications is who's trying to deliver the idea or the benefits that you want to talk about. When you think about how you choose messengers, what goes through that process?
Yeah. So for me, it really comes down to that first point, which is how do I make sure that I'm landing my request in a way that occurs as an opportunity for that member. And if you're talking about meeting with a US senator or a member of Congress who's, been around for a while and their time's very valuable and they're very senior, having the CEO show up for that meeting is going to be more impactful than
You better
having
believe it.
the vice president of government affairs, right? Now maybe if you're a big company that's very different, right? A CEO of a 10-person company is not the same as the vice president for, General Motors, right? It's a
Right.
different sort of stage, right? But you want to make sure that you're sort of matching the right level of communicator and messenger, right? Number one. The second piece is you can't do it alone, right? You do need third-party validators, and you
Right.
do need others to sort of make sure that the messages that you are articulating are validated by people that don't have the same kind of self-interest that you or your client might have in making the case. And we at Boundary Stone do this a lot. We do, like a lot of our work is is organizing and motivating the set of stakeholders that agree with you, that care about your stuff to be able to show up. And, which stakeholders matter, depends a lot on uh, the kind of client you're working with and the kind of audience and the offices that
Right.
you're talking to, right? In some offices, in Democratic offices, having labor unions show up and talk about how much this is going to mean for the workers in their state that are part of the building trades or part of the IBEW or part of the other unions. That's going to land very strongly with a lot of Democratic policymakers. It'll land strongly with some Republicans, but maybe not as strongly with others, right? And so having independent validators that that have credibility with each of those offices that can also come in and reiterate the messages is really really powerful, and important as well. So just like anything you do in communications, you want to make sure that you're thinking about who is saying the message, how that's going to land with the audience that you care about, and whether or not you can build more about conversation where there are multiple voices talking about this issue rather than having it just be one person in a one-off.
Right. And you also I find too, you have to edit. I mean, when you're dealing with technical topics, I'll go back to nuclear since you were talking about it earlier, right? How many times have you seen somebody who's risen through the ranks at their organization and maybe they're a VP of whatever it is, but all they want to talk about is how the electrons interact with the whatever. And if you think about the average day in an office in Washington, there's 40 issues that fly across your plate all day long, and nobody has the time to drill down to where this is how the electron works. They just don't.
Yeah.
So how do you help? Not only clients but people. These messengers we're talking about edit to get to the point, basically.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is the reality of, we tell folks when they're going to go in and meet with a member, you might have a 30-minute meeting scheduled, but that means the maximum time you're going to get is 30 minutes.
Right.
So plan for 15, right? Plan for a vote being called in the middle of your meeting and that
I,
member.
I've seen that so many times. You're sitting there, the bells go off, and like, well, this has been great. See you later.
That's right. Which is why I always say lead with the ask. Be
Yes.
very clear. Like you need to have a 30-second elevator pitch that you can walk in there and say, we're asking you to co-sponsor this bill, or we're asking you to introduce this legislation. We're asking you to make this appropriation request because doing so is aligned with what you care about, and making that just very clear from the outset. So that, because we've all been in these things where the long windup happens and you've explained the history of the company and how the technology works and all of those things, and then the member has to leave, and then you walk out of there and the member's like, well, that sounds great, talk to you later, right? So part of it is just making sure that when you're doing your prep, you understand that
Yeah.
this is not a place for an hour-long PowerPoint in which you have to get to slide 32 before you can actually land the punch that you're trying to land.
Yeah.
And I think the second piece is also just recognizing that for a lot of these companies, they're really proud of what they've built. It's really exciting. It's what's
Right.
causing them to wake up every morning and wait and work, 80 hours a week to bring this dream to fruition. They're excited about it. And you don't want to temper that excitement and enthusiasm. And so sometimes it's, let's write that down. Let's put that in a leave behind, so that if we don't get to all of the really cool things that you've built and the cool things about your company, like it's on paper. So if we run out of time, you can pass it across the table and then that member can look at that and read that at their leisure. But it's not a requirement to get to the ask by doing the long kind of
Right.
wind up. I think it's very easy sometimes for people in our positions who've been on Capitol Hill to just show up and say, look, nobody cares about your origin story. Nobody cares about, why your technology is better than the other guy's technology and the
Yes.
like, because they care. They built their whole life around this. It
Right.
matters. So,
Right.
so it's really about finding that balance and making sure that the client can tell their story in a way that establishes credibility and relatedness, because that's really important in these things. But kind of being very direct about, look, we got to get the ask out first, and then the more time we have, the deeper we can get into these things. But yeah, it's, and it's super frustrating. And we've seen this too. We both have, where somebody gets on an airplane, flies halfway across the company. They're
Yeah.
away from home. They're away from their business. It's taking away from the things that they need to do and they care about. And then they show up to the meeting, and their hour-long meeting turns into a 15-minute meeting, and they don't get through the stuff that they wanted to land. And, you just have to be upfront that that's just how this works sometimes, and it's super
Yeah.
frustrating. But my job as a lobbyist, or my job, is to say, this is part of one way that we're communicating. I'll follow up with the staff. I'll run into that member at an event, in a couple of weeks. We're going to continue to push this narrative in the press. We're going to work with some of the third party validators that think that what we're doing is really cool to make sure they weigh in with the office.
Right.
So, if you're putting all your eggs in the basket of that one meeting, that's a lot of risk. And that's why
Yeah.
I think good public affairs really includes strategic communications, policy communications, third party activation, stakeholder management, all of those
Right.
pieces, because it's just, it is far too risky to say that we're just going to have one meeting and that's going to solve all of our problems.
Yeah, when just for the CEO, executive type who's listening, when they come to you and they say, "Jeff, we need that public affairs campaign, and we need it right now." What do they need to be ready to commit beyond money? I mean, they're gonna put some money into this, obviously, but what like, if you're like, "Okay, I hear you, but here's what you need to be ready to commit."
Yeah, it's not unlike anything that comes across the CEO's desk. Like, it's the what's the resource requirement? And, you do have to spend money. I mean, obviously things don't just materialize on their own, right? If you want to do an
Right,
advertising campaign, you're going to put resources behind it for it to be effective. If you want to do an earned media campaign, you've got to put some resources into it. And that includes hiring professionals, but it also includes time for yourself, media training and really working through what are our core messages? What are the things that we know have been true about this company and this product for the past 10 years and are going to continue to be true for the next 10 years?
right.
And one of the hardest things that I think as an outside consultant that we find is just making sure at the front end of that engagement, there's sufficient time for us to really dig into the substance of the work that the company is doing. You just can't have an hour-long conference call once a week and learn the history, the substance, the competitors, like all of that stuff. And so I think the firms that do this the best, whether they're on the communication side or on the direct advocacy side, are the ones that put the time and effort into really understand the business plan and really understand what the company's trying to accomplish. And a lot of times that's the part that's hardest to get on people's calendars, right? Because, they hired you because they're too busy to do it by themselves. That's always the reality, right? If they
Yes,
could do it on
100%.
their own, they're not going to hire you. But when they hire you, they've got to put some time and money and time and energy into ensuring that you have the knowledge and tools that you need to be able to properly develop a strategy and represent them.
So not only CEOs, but I have to ask this for junior people who are entering this world. Like I think every college in America now has a DC branch that they've installed so that everybody can go and work in DC for, a semester or whatever it may be. But when you're thinking about people who are like, I want to get into this work, I want to work on big policy issues, I want to work on advocacy, I want to work on communications related to this, what skills should they be building right now?
Yeah. So not to dead a beat to beat a dead horse, but also to kind of show what the sort of what message discipline looks like. Really work on trying to understand how to frame things that occur as an opportunity for other people. I mean, that skill will serve you well in any industry in which, as long as you have a boss, right?
So
That's a skill
true.
that's going to matter.
Yes, so true.
Long as you have a product you're trying to sell, that skill is going to be important to you. If you get married, that skill will be important to you. If you have children, that
That
skill
skill will
will
be
be
important.
important
Yes.
to you. If people don't see something for themselves in your argument, you're going to have a very hard time motivating them to take action. And that action might be voting the right way on an amendment. That action might be buying your product. That action might be promoting you. That action might be giving you more staff resources to do your
Right.
work. That action might be to get your kids to agree to go on vacation where you want to go, right? So putting yourselves in the other person's shoes and really trying to understand what motivates them and how what you're asking them to do is an opportunity for them is a skill that, one, you can't be good enough at, and two, there's not any aspect of your life that it won't be valuable.
Jeff, I really appreciate the time you give me today. It's really great. Great conversation, and just appreciate the work you're doing as well.
Great. Thanks, Andy. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, hopefully we can continue the conversation soon.